I will go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining in for Building Blocks Part 4. This is the last session in this series, and today we'll be doing a deep dive on child-focused instructional strategies. I'm your presenter, Carrie Kennengeiser, Program Director for SE Partnerships for Inclusion, otherwise known as Skippy. And I'm sure you'll join me in my sentiment that I miss my partner in crime, Dr. Kate Aceta, who is unable to be with us today. And I hope I can make it as engaging without her. So I appreciate your grace. So with that, again, this is our last session. And last week, we talked about the third block in the Building Blocks framework, that was embedded learning opportunities. And we use those by planning short instructional interactions that are embedded within our ongoing classroom activities, routines, and transitions. But today, we are going to focus on the tippy top of that framework, and we will be describing when to use child-focused instructional strategies, or CFIS. We'll identify the basic steps to providing that instruction. We'll describe some of the strategies used in CFIS, and we'll take a little bit of time practicing how to complete an instruction at a glance form, which will help us to prepare for the CFIS. And thank you for saying hello in the chat. So back to the basics, back to our Building Blocks framework. We've spent 4 weeks now, right? The past 3 weeks just talking about all of the pieces here that are needed to really provide high quality early childhood instruction. And we know that that is our basis down here. We've talked in the previous 2 weeks about some other strategies we can use to support children who need a little bit more. So sometimes children require directed, explicit instruction in order to achieve their learning objectives and take advantage of typical early childhood curriculum. Teachers must use instruction that is even more systematic, more frequent, and even more carefully planned than those ELOs, or embedded learning opportunities, and modifications. So this is where our explicit child-focused instructional strategies come in. And CFIS are techniques and methods for delivering instruction that have really been demonstrated to result in improved child outcomes. Now, although the same strategies can be used to provide embedded learning opportunities, when we get to this top of this block tower, we also use these strategies, again, to provide more explicit instruction, to really focus on high priority learning objectives and to ensure that a child receives as many opportunities as needed to learn that objective. So you might be wondering, well, when do we use this? This sounds a lot like an ELO. So how do we distinguish the two? I'm glad you asked that question. So the first step is to decide whether the child needs this specially designed instruction. And I'll put on my Dr. Aceta hat, data, right? This is all based on the child and their data. So when we realize the child needs some more intensive learning opportunities beyond what is already occurring in the regular classroom day. So let's think about that, right? Again, embedded learning opportunities are occurring throughout the day, right? We're just kind of infusing them, peppering them within what's typically happening in our routine based on those opportunities and kids' goals. But now you notice through your observation and through your data collection that a particular child is not learning or they're not acquiring the specific skills that you would expect them to based on what you're doing. In comes the child-focused instructional strategy. Again, explicit instruction through purposeful interactions that provide kids the opportunity to work on those specific learning objectives. Now, there's some common times when we really need to address this. So one is, again, when we're seeing really slow progress, despite using curriculum modifications and or embedded learning opportunities. So maybe we've been doing an embedded learning opportunities to work on responding to a child's name when called, right? I'm going to respond to my own name when it's called. So if I, as the teacher, say Sally, and when I say her name, the goal is for her to turn and attend to me, right? Making eye contact, or at least turning her face wherever I may be. Now, maybe we've been doing this for 3 weeks, and all of us on the teaching team have been following this plan to fidelity, but we're still not seeing changes, right? Sally's not consistently attending to us when we call her name, when we use those cues. So then we might consider using the child-focused instructional strategy. Another common time we might use this is when a child needs to learn a skill to engage in the general curriculum. So this might be sitting, coming to circle, maybe eating or attending to tasks, following simple directions, right? These are things of that nature so that kids can actually begin to engage in the other activities. Another common time would be a preschool survival skill. So if I say preschool survival skill, what comes to mind? What are those types of skills? What would you think? And you can use the chat. If I'm a preschooler, what is kind of this prerequisite skill that I need to be independent in the classroom? Awesome. Yeah, Ginny, bathroom. Miriam, yes. Self-help skills. Sitting at circle, right? Sitting up. Yeah. Awesome. So absolutely, right? These are skills that can really help the child be as independent as possible in the classroom. So I think you guys said most of it. Toileting, putting on coats, dressing themselves, asking for help, interacting with peers, some of those basic skills that if I'm going to be successful in preschool and build on those skills, I need these. Ooh, transition. Yeah, absolutely. Great job. And sometimes an objective might just be unique to that particular child. So this would be something that you wouldn't necessarily be covering in the day-to-day classroom. Maybe like if a child has an augmentative communication system. So something that's specific to the child, but they need to know how to use this in order to go about their day. So that's when we would use the CFIS. So CFIS can be slightly different in how they're delivered, but they all consider the important elements of an instructional interaction, like we talked about last week. So first, we have to know what. What do we want to teach? What's that target skill or objective before we can begin our instructional episode? Second, we have to consider how we're structuring our antecedents. So what are our instructions and or prompts that we're using? And then we need to consider how we will respond, much like we talked about last week. What is our response if the child performs the skill correctly? What's that reinforcement? And what is our response or our corrective feedback if the child makes an error or doesn't respond at all, right? So the consequences. Now, when we think about the steps to a child-focused instructional strategy, once we've decided that this is the route that we should take for a particular skill, for a particular child, the basic steps are pretty similar to those that we've already outlined for embedded learning opportunities, with just a little bit, some slight adjustments. So you'll see here, we have 4 steps again. The first one, again, we're clarifying the kiddo's learning objective. and we're determining the criteria to make sure that it's clear, observable, and measurable. And we're thinking about the baseline data. What information have we collected? Where is the child currently? What's their current level of performance? So that we are using this to inform the instruction that we are creating. Step 2, then we're going to create that child-focused instructional strategy. We're designing the instructional interaction, and we're writing it on a planning form. So we'll talk about that planning form. This time it's called an instruction at a glance, and it's just, again, a little bit different than the ELO at a glance that we looked at last week. And just like everything else, then we're going to select the times of the day that make sense to work on this particular skill using this instructional interaction, and we're going to indicate it on our activity matrix. Then step 3, we're going to do what we said we were going to do. We will implement the instruction as planned. So we'll ensure that the instruction is implemented correctly and frequently enough to provide multiple opportunities across the day for the child to respond and to practice this skill with teacher guidance. And lastly, we're going to monitor the child's progress. But you'll notice this final step has changed in intensity. So the teacher or the team needs to collect child's performance data daily when we're using child-focused instructional strategies, so that we're able to make informed teaching decisions as soon as necessary. Right? We all know that teacher and child time are valuable resources. So the teacher needs to use that classroom time wisely. So the data is collected using simple measures such as counting or taking notes, right? It's got to be happening in real time. Another way in which the use of child-focused instructional strategies differs from ELOs or curriculum modifications is the time that is identified for the specially designed instructional situation. So during this time, right, we might use maybe a few minutes before or a few minutes during an ongoing classroom activity for this child-focused instructional strategy. So it differs a bit from the other pieces of our building block framework. Any questions so far? Okay. So now I'll talk about some of the strategy categories. So again, whether we are planning to provide instruction that's embedded within an ongoing activity or routine, or as something that's specially, it's as a specially designed part of the day, those basic instructional strategies are the same. And they can be divided into 3 categories: instructions, right? What to do, and that's the teacher conveying that to the child. Prompting strategies, which increase the likelihood that the child's going to do what we want them to do. Again, the teacher is providing that to the child. And then our consequence strategies. So again, what's happening immediately after the behavior, the target skill, etc. And that's our response or our corrective feedback, reinforcement to the child. So let's look at the first one. And I'm sure most of you on this call, all of you probably are like, yes, definitely, I know this. But instructions, right? What do your students need to know? The child that you've decided, I need to create a child-focused instructional strategy for this particular objective. Well, what do I need to do? Well, I need to think about my instructions, and you all know that they should be short, clear, and focused on an observable behavior. So what can you see or measure? Okay. We had folks kind of talking about sitting at circle time. So how about calm bodies at circle? Can I measure calm bodies at circle? Is that observable? Yeah, thanks, Ginny. If I clearly define calm, right? Because when I say calm, you might have a different picture in your mind of what that looks like than I do, than someone else does. And that could be a very, very abstract concept for the students that you're working with. So I'd say, no, I can't measure calm. Really, I don't know what that looks like. I'm a 3-4-year-old. What is that? But I can measure bottoms on rug, hands on lap, right? I can see that and I can check it off. Yes, the child has their bottom on the rug, the child has their hands on their lap, right? That is something I can see, so I can measure it. And then we need to make sure we're framing our instructions positively. So again, we always tell kids what to do, what we want to see, not what we don't want. And again, I am sure I'm preaching to the choir, right? So, and this is for any time we give a child any instruction, right? We always need to avoid saying things like no, don't, stop in our instructions, right? We wouldn't say no running because kids are going to hear running. So instead, we always want to tell the child what is expected. So for example, a child sits down at the table, we are going to tell them hands in lap, so that they don't pick up the fork and fling it around at their peers, right? We wouldn't say, don't pick up your fork, because then what is the child hear? They hear pick up the fork. So we want to tell them exactly what to do. So we might say forks on table. It's observable, it's measurable. Anyone could walk into the room and know what the instruction was. So when you write your instructions down, when you're doing the child-focused instructional strategy, sometimes it's helpful to read them out loud, think about it, maybe ask someone else if it's something that is observable. Then we have our prompting strategies. So there's a couple of ways that we can think about this. There is graduated guidance, and this is least to most prompting. So the least prompt would be a verbal prompt. And then if we're thinking of the most prompt would be some hand over hand physical assistance, and lots of other types of prompting that would fall in between there, like gestures or modeling or using pictures. So the teacher would provide the least amount of assistance necessary to the child, and then would remove that help as soon as the child can do their skill, do the skill on their own. Can you think about some times that you've used this least to most prompting or graduated guidance? Some examples that you have? Right, because we don't want to give them too much support, right? We don't want them to then, we don't want to affect their independence. We don't want to have them lean on us if they don't need that type of support. So I see putting on coats, cleaning up, or self-help skills in bathrooming. What other things have you used the least to most? Ooh, writing. Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, those self-help skills at meals, right? Sometimes how easy it is to just be like, okay, I got it, and open everything for everyone. But no, let them, what's the least amount of support that they need? Awesome. Then we have time delay, right? So we know this is waiting to deliver that prompt. And if you're like me, this is really hard, right? And most teachers would say it's hard because that waiting kind of feels like forever. So maybe you are working with the child and you're trying to get that child to request. So maybe you're holding up a pencil. You're going to hold up the pencil and you're going to wait because the goal is to get the child to say something along the lines of, I want the pencil, or pencil, please, right? To request that item. So you're going to hold it and you're waiting. And then when they say pencil, please, then you would give them the pencil. And again, this can feel like forever. So you might even want to use a prompt to elicit that request. Oh, I want the pencil, please. Whatever phrase it is that you're working on with the child, wherever that language development is. And remember, you always want to match the child's language development when you're giving any of these prompting or instructional strategies. So we want to keep it as simple as possible, because we are working on skills when kids are not learning them in their daily routine, right? So these aren't just strategies that we're using all day long for every skill. We are really using these during a time around a specific strategy that the child is not learning within those daily routines, right? And then there's backwards chaining, which I know is one of Dr. Aceta's favorites. So I'm sad again that she's not here with us. And for some objectives, it might make sense for the teacher to provide assistance for each step, but we do this in reverse order. So we're going to begin with the last step first, and then to the second to last, and so forth, until all of the prompts and assistance are gradually removed. So I'm going to stop the slides for a second and show you a quick little video where they use backward chaining to help work on hand washing skills.
Now let's look at how to perform backward chaining. The definition of backward chaining is linking together behaviors beginning with the last behavior in the chain. Let's go through the procedure with the same example of washing hands in order to see how this type of chaining differs from forward chaining. First, prompt your student to perform all the behaviors in the chain in order, except for the last behavior, and then reinforce your student's independent performance of the last behavior.
Wash hands. Okay, we're going to turn water on, get soap, rub hands, scrub, 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 rub, rub, rub. Excellent. Water off. Great job. Your hands are all clean now. Here's your fruit treat.
In this example, we see the instructor prompting the student to turn on water, get soap, rub hands, rinse hands, and turn off water. The instructor stops before the last behavior, and the student must complete the last behavior of drying hands independently in order to receive reinforcement. Then, reinforce your student's independent performance of the next to last and last behaviors in order.
Wash hands. You're going to turn water on, get soap, rub your hands, rub, 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 scrub, scrub, scrub. Great job. You remembered all by yourself. That's excellent. Here's your fruit treat.
Now you see the instructor prompts the student to turn on water, get soap, rub hands, and rinse hands, but then stops so that the student must complete the last two behaviors of turning off water and drying hands in order to get the reinforcer. Then reinforce your student's independent performance of the last three steps in order, and continue in this manner until your student can complete the entire chain independently following the SD.
What other instances have you used backward chaining? I think the hand washing one is pretty popular. Have you used it before? riding a trike, right? Bathrooming, dressing. Ooh, arrival procedures. It's a great strategy to use to support students who need this level of assistance, right? Departure as well. Any other thoughts on the prompting strategies? Okay. And then we go to consequence strategies. So as we know, what happens after the behavior, right? What's our response to the child's behavior? So this might be positive reinforcement, and this is typically what we think of. So this is going to increase the likelihood that something will keep happening, right? Because it feels good to have some positive reinforcement. So what it's on the slide actually, so I'm not going to ask you. This could be high fives. It could be specific verbal praise. Maybe it's a sticker chart. In the video, they used a edible reinforcer. That's not something that we need to do often. We might have students that really works for, but the key is that we think about what is the least that we can really do that's positively reinforcing for this. Right. So we would never want to start out with giving kids like a full slice of pizza or something wild every time they said their name, because we know that's a lot and we can't maintain that. And that's going to be really hard to fade back. Right. So even with her giving the little fruit snacks, I would say, what's something that's more socially appropriate and easier to implement by more people, right? That high five, that smile, things like that. And really getting to know our individual students. What's reinforcing for this particular child, right? So we want to find out what that's going to be, because maybe I don't like high fives, so that's not reinforcing for me. So what are some things that you all have used for positive reinforcement that were simple and really easy to implement and easy for anyone on your team to also implement? Right, a fist bump, that's a great one. Right, that seems more of the times than a high five, maybe. What else? Oh yeah, an air five, Martha, I like that. Oh, Tracy, I forgot about the kiss your brain. I used to love using that one. Yeah, right, just that positive, descriptive, specific praise. Ooh, fireworks or cheese grater. I don't know what those are, Dana, but I'm sure they're really exciting. So right, there's lots of simple things, and kids tend to really love them. So when we start small like that, again, it's so much easier than if we start big and try to get really in the weeds about thinking what our positive reinforcement could be. So another strategy that we can use, and one of my favorites when I was in the classroom, is differential reinforcement of other behavior. So really the idea behind this is that, catch the child's being good philosophy. So we want to decrease those less desired behaviors by positively reinforcing the behaviors that we do want to see. So an example of this might be when we want to decrease a child running away from circle time. So every time that kiddo comes to circle and sits down, we're going to call attention to that, right? Yeah, and we're going to praise the child. Kate, you are sitting so nicely on the carpet. I love how your bottom is on your square, right? Rather than reinforcing or focusing on the behavior that we don't want to see by saying things like, stop running. It's not what we want to do, right? So we're going to actively ignore, which is hard. I understand that less desired behavior, and we're going to reinforce the behavior that we want to see. And this works really well for kids who tend to yell out and who are off task. And then there's corrective feedback. So this lets a child know when a response or a behavior is incorrect or unacceptable, and shows the kiddo the more appropriate alternative. So this is offering a child information and should always be delivered in a neutral tone. So it's really important to understand and remember that this is not a punishment, right? And we definitely are not shaming the child. So it's really important to think about our delivery of something like this. So for example, let's say a child is working on colors, right? And I hold up a red marble and I ask, what color? And the child, let's say, responds blue. So I'm simply going to say, it's red, say red. Rather than saying, oop, that's not right. Because even when we say that, right, even when we're not being mean about it, it can still be perceived as a punishment, and it could be shaming. And we just never want to do that, right? We want to build these nurturing relationships with kids. We want to make them feel safe. We want to make them feel like they belong. So we always want to think about kind of how we deliver that and teach those behaviors we want to see. So another example, maybe a child grabs a toy from another kiddo. I'm sure you've seen that, right? So rather than saying, no, don't grab, we're going to prompt and teach. So I might say something like, Kate, Gemma was playing with that block. If you want to turn, you need to ask, right? And we're going to do that in a neutral tone. We're going to try to think about how we are saying those words and not kind of have some type of tone that feels punishing or judgy or anything like that. So I see a hand raised. So Karen, you can use the chat if you have anything to comment on that. Are there other ways that you all have provided corrective feedback or other thoughts that you have on that? I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. So then we have the instruction at a glance. So this is a form and it's similar to that ELO at a glance form, but the difference is it requires more planning and really precision on the part of the teacher and the team. So we really want to focus on the setting, the instructional interaction, and we're definitely going to monitor progress, right? That's critical. And then there's a space for any comments, questions, things like that, that we might have while we're doing this. So again, this is similar to the embedded learning opportunities, right? It's real critical to think about the setting and that instructional interaction, because the more specific you are, the more likely you're going to elicit the behavior that leads to the learning. So if it's too vague when you complete this, when you plan for your instructional interaction, then it won't make sense, right? We want to make sure that we're being specific in our setting or the time of the day that this is going to occur and what the instructional interaction is going to look like. Really thinking about what strategies are we going to use to guide the child toward learning the behavior in an explicit and direct manner. So let's kind of look at this example. So we have an example here where Tina is working on independently and accurately telling events that have occurred on the same day, at least 30 minutes after the event has actually occurred. So they thought through, when are they going to provide this instruction? At the end of work time, where? Near the large group area. And we're thinking really concretely, how often are we going to provide this opportunity? Well, we're doing 5 trials, and we're going to also repeat this at recall time. And just like in ELO, what materials do we need? The more specific we can be, the more we can be planned ahead to really make this a successful instructional interaction. So the teachers here have identified that they'll need pictures or toys from centers and those items from review work time with Tina. So then they plan out the instructional interaction. And again, we know the behavior. This is the target. We want Tina to say 2 to 3 word phrases that are, they make sense in the context of what we are asking her. So the instruction, they asked Tina a question. What did you do at work time? Again, it was clear and concise. It wasn't wordy. Then they're going to wait. They're going to use that wait time as a strategy initially. Wait 3 seconds. So if Tina says something like, I paint hearts, then we say, yes, you painted hearts at work time. And we're going to expand on the response. So we might say, oh, what color heart did you paint? Can you tell me this color? And there's our instructional interaction. But if Tina doesn't say what she did during that time, then we'll model and prompt. You painted hearts. Say, I painted hearts. And then that is our instructional loop. And then we're going to make sure we have a place to capture really how she's responding to her trials. So on the 5 trials, we're going to circle which one she got correct. So she got her 2nd trial and her 5th trial correct. And here's just a simple way to capture that data. And if I had any comments on things that she did or said, I might put it here. Any questions about this form or how you might use it or things that you've done that feel similar? Again, it's kind of that balance of keeping it simple, but being specific enough so that anyone on the teaching team can provide this instructional interaction and can then capture on your monitoring form what's happening. Yeah, I agree, Dana. It's nice and it's clear, and it's a very organized format. All right, well, we have about 20 minutes left. Let's try to practice using this form and designing some instructional interactions, thinking about a kiddo who's really struggled and who's not showing these skills throughout our daily activities and routines. So for example, if I have Drew and Drew really struggles with dressing himself, right? He's struggling with kind of undoing the buttons on his jacket or his pants and zipping and unzipping his coat. So what objective might we write for Drew? And then I'm going to skip around and kind of go back, right? Thinking about when are we using the CFIS, right? Maybe he's had really slow progress and they've been working on this with him through some ELOs. And this is also that preschool survival skill, right? He needs to be able how to dress himself. So we have the data, we've collected it, and Drew is just not able to independently take off his jacket when he comes in the classroom and put on his jacket when he leaves at the end of the day. So how could I make the objective clear, observable, and measurable? What might I say? Okay, thanks, Crystal. Right, maybe will unbutton and remove coat. When is he doing this? Or where is this happening? Let's think about our setting for instruction. Okay, yeah, arrival would be a great time. So Drew will unbutton and remove his coat at arrival, or we could say at arrival and departure. How often do we want him to do this? How many trials are we giving him? Right, so Dana's focusing on the instruction piece, right? We know he's really struggled with this. So maybe we're going to include in the objective that he is going to unbutton and remove his coat at arrival with one verbal prompt in 4 out of 5 trials. Or, yep, let's see. Drew will work with buttoning board to increase his fine motor skills during center time. Right? We might also have that as well. So there's lots of things that we can think about to give them multiple opportunities to practice this skill. So let's say we're going with the unbuttoning and removing his coat during arrival. Let's say that's what we focused on. We know that the behavior or the target is that unbuttoning, removing his coat, and maybe we do the with one prompt during arrival. What instruction might we give? How can we give an observable, clear, measurable instruction to Drew? Or let's go back to our prompting strategies. What kind of prompt? Dana said in the chat that she would use a verbal prompt. So maybe that would be, Drew, take off your jacket. Or Drew, unbutton your coat. Yeah, Crystal said the same thing, unbutton coat, right? Unbutton your coat. What if that doesn't work? What if I do that, right? Oops. That's my instruction. We know my target behavior. If he does it, great job unbuttoning your jacket, Drew. And give him a high five. But what happens if when you say, Drew, unbutton your coat, he doesn't, he's not able to, or he doesn't follow through? So Dana says giving him a partial physical prompt, right? Maybe starting to unbutton that for him. A gesture, good job, Crystal, right? Like, unbutton your coat, some physical assistance. So again, right, or touch the button, visuals. So how would I decide whether I'm going to use a gesture or a visual or some partial physical assistance? What would help me to decide what prompt I would provide Drew if he's unable to correctly follow through with the targeted behavior? When I'm planning this, what's going to inform my planning? Yeah, right. Seemed like it was a trick question. Crystal, right. What is he able to do? I've collected the data, I've observed, I know what he needs, and I want to give him the least of amount of assistance to help him be able to do this. And then in my observations, if I'm collecting the data, and I think we said what, in 4 out of 5 trials, and if he's struggling consistently by me giving him the verbal prompt, well, then that's not working. Maybe he's going to need a different type of prompt. Yeah, absolutely. And then again, I will have that all indicated here to monitor progress. Let's try another one. What about Jenny? We have a student, Jenny, and throughout the day, she consistently is struggling with identifying her own name in print. What are we going to do for Jenny? We've tried some curriculum modifications, we've tried some ELOs, but she still can't identify her name. What might we try for Jenny? Oops, sorry, y'all. Yeah, Kimberly, I might have a picture with her name on it. The letter of her first name. What might be an objective that we write for her? Yeah, Miriam agrees, starting with the first letter of her name, right? Maybe her whole name, identifying all 6 letters and putting that together, that's too much. So maybe we want to kind of break that down and focus on the J. So what's an objective that we could write for her? Yeah, I also agree, Crystal, right? We'd want her name written everywhere so that she's got lots of opportunities to see that written in print. So Dana says, Jenny will identify the first letter in her name out of 2 letters. That's great. That's very specific. And how many trials do we want to give for her? And when and where would this happen? When would we be practicing with her on identifying her name, the letters in her name? Yeah, Sherry, that's a really good point too. Thinking about students' languages, because there could be a language barrier. But her name would probably be the same in each language. But that would be another piece to consider as well. So when and where would make sense to work on this objective with her? Crystal, that's a great idea, right? Beginning of activity changes. So then as a teacher, I can spend a little bit extra time working with her on that, because it's not going to be as seamless as an embedded learning opportunity where it's just kind of within the natural activities in the day. We're finding more time to really provide this specially designed instruction. Oh, when finding a center, that's great. Sorry if you hear the barking in the background. So what might I say? What might my instruction be? Yeah, Crystal, keep it simple. Find your name. Or if we're focusing on the objective that she's going to identify the first letter in her name, then Dana, it's like you read my mind. Touch the letter in your name, or touch the J, touch your J. Again, keeping it very simple in language that the child can access. So if the child does that, we can provide some positive reinforcement, give them a high five. Jenny, great job touching the J. You touch the J. What happens if Jenny is not able to identify or touch that J? What type of prompt might we provide? So if she's not finding her name at the beginning of the activity, or if she's not pointing to the J, if that's the objective we're working on, yeah, we might model. We might say, Jenny, this is your name. Jenny, this is a J. Say J. So again, we can then close out that instructional loop. And then again, we would monitor our progress. If we said that she's going to do it 3 times out of 5, or whatever the criteria that we established was, we're going to keep track of that and then make sure that we are including that on our form. What questions do you have about CFIS, Child-Focused Instructional Strategies? Or what questions in general do you have about the building blocks framework and how to incorporate that in your classrooms to work with all of your students? No questions? I mean, it's okay if you have no questions. If you do think of things, again, you know how to contact me. And if you have a particular question that maybe you want to address for Kate, Dr. Aceta, again, you can always email at skippy@mailbox.sc.edu. And if I don't have the answer to your question, I'll make sure to connect with whomever does, or I'll connect you with Dr. Aceta.